I really do believe trust is kind of the currency of business and relationships. It requires work all the time. It's not given easily, but when you have that and an organization or an individual is really in a tough spot or is facing some kind of amazing opportunity, to be able to be there with them in that foxhole and to really help out and be a counselor is incredibly satisfying.
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Chaz Withers, Chairman and CEO of Dix Eaton, the storied Cleveland integrated communications firm known for its specialization in marketing communications, crisis management, and investor relations, which has partnered with its clients to drive impact and results in their public relations since 1952. While Chaz has led the firm as CEO since 2015, he's overseen many aspects of the business prior, serving as Chief Operating Officer and leader of the Marketing Communications, Technology, Emerging Growth, and Interactive Services practice for about 7 years. Chaz first worked at Dix Eaton, though, as a senior account executive between 1995 and 1997, before he had the opportunity to join Answerthink, a Miami-based international consulting firm, as managing director, where he played a pivotal role in the company's IPO and oversaw over 1,500 employees. Chaz has also served as a director of media relations at Case Western Reserve University and has held similar roles with Malone Public Relations and Children's Hospital Medical Center of Akron. This conversation is a masterclass on communications and the story of Dix Eaton. Chaz offers his perspective on running towards the fire and addressing thorny situations head-on, stewardship in high-stakes situations that span multiple constituents of shareholders, of employees, of customers, of legislators, of communities, and of the media, employee ownership, technology's implications for communications and marketing, the significance of Cleveland and Dix Eaton's story, and a whole lot more. So please enjoy this awesome conversation with Chaz Withers after a brief message from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by John Carroll University's Boler College of Business, widely recognized as one of the top business schools in the region. As we've heard time and time again from entrepreneurs here on Lay of the Land, many of whom are proud alumni of John Carroll University, success in this ever-changing world of business requires a dynamic and innovative mindset, deep understanding of emerging technologies and systems, strong ethics, leadership prowess, acute business acumen, all qualities nurtured through the Boler College of Business. With 4 different MBA programs of study spanning professional, online, hybrid, and 1-year flexible, the Boler College of Business provides flexible timelines and various class structures for each MBA track, including online, in-person, hybrid, and asynchronous, all to offer the most effective options for you, including the ability to participate in an elective international study tour, providing unparalleled opportunities to expand your global business knowledge by networking with local companies overseas and experiencing a new culture. The career impact of a Boler MBA is formative and will help prepare you for this future of business and get more out of your career. To learn more about John Carroll University's Boler MBA programs, please go to business.jcu.edu. The Boler College of Business is fully accredited by AACSB International, the highest accreditation a college of business can have. So, for a long time now, I was hoping at some point to be able to memorialize a piece of the Dix Eaton story here, because I felt to have kind of a true lay of the land and not chronicle the story and work that your firm has done, both with so many other Cleveland institutions, but also as such a long-standing institution on its own, would be to miss a substantial piece of this whole map that we're, cartographers in through this podcast. So thank you for coming on, Chaz.
My pleasure, and appreciate just those sentiments. We've been around for 71 years, so we do have roots here for sure.
So at the highest level, and we'll weave together a few threads here as we make our way through the conversation. What is Dix Eaton? If you could take us back to the early 1950s at its inception and help us understand, the set of circumstances that led to its formation and what really catalyzed the founding of the organization. What does that look like?
Probably on about its fifth iteration, but to move through them pretty quickly. Henry Eaton and John Dix were working somewhere and decided they didn't like their jobs anymore. So at great risk, they decided to leave and go start their own industrial marketing firm 71 years ago. And they found there was a captive need in the marketplace for what they wanted to offer, which was communications and marketing services across a number of different audiences. So how do you talk to your employees and associates? How do you talk to customers? How do you leverage the media and outside sources? How do you talk to your investors? How do you engage with the communities in which you operate? And they found they were really good at this, and there was a huge appetite, and the firm grew and grew. And Henry, ultimately, John Dix left the firm, so Henry really was the patriarch and became sort of I would say, a scion of the community. He was the CEO whisperer, meaning he was behind the scenes, the conciliary or confidant of many of the most prominent CEOs around town, helping to solve both for the biggest professional challenges, and I think oftentimes also playing the role of semi-therapist or helping people through challenging circumstances. We moved into the 1990s, and Henry decided he wanted to begin selling the firm to employees, which he did. And ultimately, Scott Chaikin became the second CEO of the firm in the mid-1990s. The core focus of what we did had morphed somewhat during that time, but it was still a lot of investor relations, a lot of crisis communications, a lot of media relations, and a lot of marketing communications. And we like to think doing the work that matters most and that oftentimes is the most complex. We talk a lot about we run towards the fire, not away from the fire, meaning the thornier and the more ornery a situation, I think oftentimes the more we can help. And that the firm continued to grow. I came to the firm first in 1995 and then left and came back in 2000 and started our emerging growth practice, which at that time, this was sort of full .com era. And we started doing some things we had never done before, focusing on smaller enterprises, helping them grow, helping them with the funding process. And well, all the things that go along with that. And then through the 1990s, continue to plug along. 08, 09 arrives, and the bottom falls out of the financial world. And I would say Dix Eaton went through a major change at that time. I think the relationships we had with clients changed pretty significant way. It was a very difficult time, and we got through that, came out the other side. I think it even resharpened some of the things that we do. And then in 2014, we made one of the biggest steps we've ever made in our history. We converted to an ESOP. So we had a small set of employee owners. We decided to sell the entire firm to the employees. We became 100% ESOP. There's different variations on it. So that was probably the second biggest transaction in our history, and that has continued to grow. And then last year we did the biggest transaction in our history. We bought a firm in St. Louis called the Standing Partnership, whom we've known and worked with for about 15 years. And it has greatly expanded the scope of things that we do. But I would say at our root cause, we remain trusted advisors on communications and marketing issues that span just about anything you can think of.
Amazing. And we'll definitely take some time to work through, some of the details and nuance of those transactions in the history of the firm. But I would love to, as we get to that, set the stage a bit with how your personal journey begins to intersect with that of the company. What were your own set of motivations and interests and experiences that, through your study of journalism, interest in PR, led you down this path itself?
I'm probably like most people. I feel like there are a few sliding door moments that have led me to career-wise where I am today. And, you think about how different things might have been if you had stepped through some
Absolutely.
of those. The first of which was I was in school at Kent State. I really wanted to be a sports writer. It is what I'd wanted to do since I was really young. And I had a professor my junior year tell me, I think you should go do an internship in PR. And she said at the time, you've got a lot of BS about you. I think you could do this well. I took that as, I don't know whether that was a backhanded compliment or an outright insult, but her point being the ability to tell stories in a variety of different formats. And that proved really a huge change for me. So I went and got an internship with a hospital. I really liked the work, and they ended up hiring me before I graduated from college. That was really my first job out of school. And fortuitously, and again, this is one of the people that I worked with who was our outside partner was a guy that worked at Dix Eaton. And he started recruiting me a couple years later. And I joined the firm for the first time in 1995. And I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the pace of the work, how dynamic it was. I loved that there were a lot of bet the farm scenarios. You either, working in an organization like ours, I think requires a mindset where variety has to be a priority for you. If you just want to sit and do the same thing every day, that's not going to fit who we are. Pace is really incredibly fast. And there's a lot of iterative friction in the system. And again, either you like that or you don't like that. It suited me really well. So I stayed for a couple of years and I got this unbelievable opportunity to leave. And Henry Eaton was still the CEO at that time. And this has stayed with me like so clearly to this day. I remember going to him and I had so much respect for him. He was a huge mentor for me in my career. And I said, I've got this opportunity. And I was so scared he was just going to start throwing stuff at me. And he listened, as was the best thing he did. He was a phenomenal listener. And he looked at me and he said, that's really interesting. I think you ought to go do that for a couple of years and come back to us and you'll be even more valuable. And so it's exactly what I did. I left and came back to Dix Eaton in 2000 and then have been really fortunate to play a number of roles at the firm over time, gradually moving into more senior leadership roles. And I'm the third CEO in 71 years. So there's very much this don't screw it up. But more seriously, it's a responsibility that means everything to me at my core to protect our people and our integrity, our brand, what we stand for. I consider myself very much a servant leader. I work for our team and try and do the best for them every day to provide them with opportunities and take care of our clients. So it's been an unbelievable ride. I can't believe it's coming up on 30 years.
Well, I love how you kind of grounded all that at its beginning in how it's all about storytelling, because I think that will probably be the theme of what we talk about here today. It's certainly the most pervasive theme of this podcast is how entrepreneurs, CEOs think about storytelling. And so I did also want to ground the conversation in storytelling. What at the highest level, when you think about communications, public relations, what are these concepts? How do you even think about them? How have they changed over time? And a bit of what the market that you are operating in looks like tethered to those concepts.
Gosh, that is a really big, complex question. I would say one thing that's bedrock to that entire equation is organizations work best when they build trust with their different audiences. So again, if you click through your employees, your customers, communities, legislative bodies, the media, and having good relationships and trust-based relationships across that spectrum is going to serve you well in good times and in bad times. And I feel like that's what we've always been focused on. And there's a misnomer, I think, around the concept of public relations that you're trying to tell a false narrative. And that's something that I have never touched in my life. What we try and do is help organizations who oftentimes they're so close to their own knitting that they can't see what's really taking place or why it would matter to someone else. And your question, Jeffrey, about why today the trust factor in institutions is at all-time historical lows.
Yeah.
And to me, it's never, ever, ever been more important for organizations. What is your what's your big driving KPIs? What are the things that make your organization successful? First and foremost, it's often recruiting and retaining great talent. So you have to be able to tell a story about why they should care. And today, I think if you're talking about new hires or midstream hires, they've got a different set of criteria why they care than used to be. Well, line up, here's the salary, here's the benefits, come on board. They're asking a lot of different questions in that. For customers, it's not just good enough that, hey, you've been our customer for 20 years. It's constantly having to reinvent yourself, find new channels to connect, being innovative in the way that you talk about your products or services. And I think there has to be a consistency. One of the things that I see most often with organizations, change is just a constant. Everybody's going through it all the time. And so are you telling a consistent story, and are you doing it with cadence and clarity, or are you leaving it to people to invent their own narrative? And to me, that's the biggest challenge and danger we face today is the media has been diminished so much in terms of its power and its impact.
Yeah.
We have so much earned or created content that is really designed only for audiences that kind of fit the bill for who they want to reach. And so how do you really connect with people in a way that creates trust? And it's dramatically different today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I fully expect it's going to continue to morph and be even more different just a few years from now.
Yeah. The whole problem space that you get to operate in, I find particularly fascinating when you layer on, I think, just the whole set of themes that you mentioned, kind of the waning trust in institutions, the exponential cost decline of content creation, and just kind of the overflow of content, are like shrinking attention spans. How more and more firms are even going direct, trying to own their own audience, own the distribution, own the channels directly. I would love to understand, kind of through that as well, how, and maybe to make it concrete in the form of, some projects that the firm has done to paint a picture of this. But how do you help folks actually, navigate these challenges? Like what is the work to be done?
If you look at just the concept of change, and let's say you're a large organization and you go through a massive M&A project, and we do several of these a year. You come out the other side of that, leadership may have changed, focus of the organization may have changed. You've created this much more diffused and delineated landscape of employees and associates, some of whom know the legacy organization, some of whom are familiar with their own organization. And if you're a leadership team, you're sitting there saying, we've got to start getting traction with this as quickly as possible. We have to mitigate the questions that people are asking. We have to give them a picture of why they should care and why this is going to be good. And we have to do it across innumerable channels. So how do we do that? And I think being an expert at having asked all those questions about what are the things that are going to matter, how are people going to get their information, what resonates, what doesn't, what's the frequency of messages that starts to click for people? They want an answer, and a lot of times these are not off the shelf solutions. This is going to be unique to any situation. We recently just helped a longtime client go through the biggest transaction they've ever had and acquiring a company that is very different than they are. And so they're right now just in the early stages of, okay, now we're one different organization. What does that mean? And all the messaging that goes underneath that, how you translate that via online media, through video, through repeated managerial messaging. And I find that stuff fascinating. I love the inside of change and how you navigate it and come out the other side of it, having accelerated performance or having provided answers to people even before they answer them. I think one thing that stands out to me so clearly and more even important today than I think it used to be, in the absence of information or a vacuum of information, people will invent their own narrative. And so oftentimes it may or may not be rooted in any form of truth. So when companies ask us or organizations ask us sometimes, so why should we do this? The answer is oftentimes, well, if you don't, someone else will, or the people that matter most to you are just going to come to their own conclusions. And I think there is a enormous degree of truth to that. And the problem is if you just don't have a history of communications or that follow through or have that trust where people are going to listen to you, you start getting this diffusion in your organization, and it really can eat away at you. It's insidious in terms of long-term damage, and people just stop listening at a certain point.
What have you learned about being in the fire? I love that concept of running towards it and operating in it in what most certainly is the environment where the tensions are the highest, the sense of stability and clarity is the lowest, where it's probably the least familiar and highest risk, situations that companies, CEOs, teams would find themselves in, and they come to you in a moment of crisis. What have you learned in your time helping folks navigate being in the fire and getting out the other side?
Two things immediately. One, people never stop screwing up. So in some ways, it's a good thing for our business because bad decisions, bad behavior, things that just go sideways. And that's not including, just a deal that goes bad or something. That happens all the time. But humans are humans, and they do curious things at curious times that often then require a lot of cleanup in the aftermath. And some of that's horrible. Some of that is sort of unspeakable. But what has to happen then is you've got to move forward, and you got to help an organization figure out, okay, so what's our next step? And what are we going to say to people? I'm in the middle of something right now that's super confidential, but it's a major change initiative. It's very thorny. It's going to have a long tail on it. It's incredibly complex, and it's very personal. And so you're sitting there trying to be a very objective arbiter to get the full landscape and the full consideration set of facts to then begin to formulate, so where do we go from here? What's the game plan? How do we do that? And I think one thing that you find with organizations like us that are in the middle of these things all the time, the first thing you can bring to an engagement that is welcome is calm. You can bring a reasoned perspective that immediately sort of dampens down the drama or just the personal emotion. And I see it from CEOs of Fortune 100 companies all the way down through organizations. People take things very personally. They get very emotionally invested. They get angry. They get frustrated, whatever it might be. And ultimately, you're trying to solve for a problem and figure out a path forward. And so being able to take a step back from that, be reasoned, get all the ideas and facts on the table, and then figure out where you move forward from there, I think is something that we do really well. I enjoy it, but I enjoy it I would say, in spurts. If you live in that world all the time, it could be exhausting. That's for sure.
How often do leaders proactively come to you as a firm, as counsel, versus, something has gone catastrophically wrong and there's a bit of flailing, and through the work that you've done, the experience that you've had, been able to position yourself as kind of the soft landing for folks? And how should CEOs think about the proactive nature of any of this?
You're never too early to call when something takes place. If you're on the reactive side of things, the quicker you can begin to deal with it and move forward, the better off you're going to be. But so often we get brought in several days after something's transpired. I get outreach from a couple of CEOs a week on different issues that they think could get nasty or thorny or just have implications. And a lot of times that's just talking something through and seeing whether there's a reality to it or whether it's really something to pay attention to. And I think my relationship on the CEO level a lot of times is just to be a discussion partner and hear that out and see what the real risk might be. There's lots of other things, Jeff. We've done a lot of work, unfortunately, in the aviation industry. So if a plane crashes or a helicopter crashes, or you're dealing with heavily regulated industries where there's a very specific next step, there's going to be an investigation. Having knowledge of how that entire process works and technical expertise is really valuable and important. Mining accidents, environmental accidents, all of those things, when they transpire, hopefully there is not loss of life, but there's always a lot to sort out on the other side of it. And, we've just done a lot of that work, and there's a real importance to finding somebody that can answer those questions for you quickly.
What have you learned about building trust through all of this?
Are you familiar with the trust equation? I realize this is a podcast, so I don't want to get too off. But
no, I am not. But help us visualize it.
So the trust equation is a concept by a guy named David Maister, who wrote a book called The Trusted Advisor, and it's rooted in actually some math. It's credibility, reliability, intimacy divided by self-orientation. And by the way, I have found that this equation works in business, it works in life, it works with your spouse, it works everywhere. Yeah. Reliability, broken down, is, do you do what you say you're going to do when you're expected to do it? Do you carry through on your promises? Credibility is the things that you know that are valuable to someone else, your unique knowledge or perspective that is going to help someone else solve an issue. The intimacy piece is, do you genuinely and authentically care about the welfare and well-being of the person with whom you're working or counseling? Can't invent it, can't be postured. You've got to really be invested in how they're doing and if you can help them out. And then the self-orientation denominator is, if it starts with you, we're in a service-oriented, we're a client-serving business. It can't be about you, it's got to be about them. And you carry through on that, and there's different variations. Some people are really high in credibility. Some people really connect on the intimacy side. The self-orientation piece, it just doesn't work in our business. If we hire someone and they're all about themselves, they don't last very long. But that trust equation means a lot of investment and time with people to get to know them, to really understand challenges they're facing. There very much is a huge psychological component to our business. I mean, you got to really care about how someone's doing. You've really got to listen and ask thoughtful questions that are not just about, we talk a lot about the question below the question, below the question, below the question, because sometimes somebody's going to tell you what is immediately on their mind, but that's not really what's bothering them. And you dig to the next level, or you dig to the next level. And then trust, if you're talking about investors, or you're talking about the media, or you're talking about your associates, it's about doing things with consistency, living a certain set of ideals, carrying through on that again and again and again, because there is such a truth about trust, and that is, it does take a long time to build it up, and it takes like a split second for it to diminish significantly, and then you're trying to rebuild it. So I really do believe trust is kind of the currency of business and relationships. It requires work all the time. It's not given easily, but when you have that, and an organization or an individual is really in a tough spot or is facing some kind of amazing opportunity, to be able to be there with them in that foxhole and to really help out and be a counselor is incredibly satisfying. Those are good days. That's days when you get a lot of juice from just that relationship.
Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. Now, so in your role leading the organization, I want to kind of come to something you mentioned earlier from the perspective of, a third-time CEO within the organization, and this kind of don't screw it up, framing of it. How do you balance this, need to preserve the organization and the risk that was required to be taken to create it in the first place, and how you think about, this tension between preservation and value creation within the firm. And perhaps that's like a good way to talk about how you've thought about, this acquisition and just kind of the growth of the business and where it is today and what your approach is to leading it.
Awesome question. And this, again, I think has evolved in my time. I became president in 2009. So really at a very low point in terms of what was taking place on kind of the world macroeconomic stage.
Yeah.
And when we converted to an ESOP, my commitment had always been to help our people be as successful as possible. And that means being able to do great work, to be well compensated, to reaping the rewards of being employees of the organization. That always meant a lot to me. That meant a lot to Henry. That meant a lot to Scott. So I had two mentors ahead of me that had really instilled those ideals. And one of the things that became increasingly apparent to me in the last 3 or 4 years, and this I think was exacerbated then by COVID, was there were real opportunities out there to grow inorganically in a way that maybe didn't exist before. So we had always resisted the idea of buying someone else because we felt we had a singular culture and approach, and it would be hard to find somebody that would really match to that. And this firm in St. Louis, owned by two women, both of whom I had known the principal there for, as I said, about 15 years. And they approached us about doing this. And I immediately said, oh my gosh, yes, we'd like to talk about it. And the reason was, Dix Eaton has existed on the Cleveland landscape. We've had offices in other places for a long period of time. But one of the things that's fundamentally changed about the landscape, Jeffrey, is, Cleveland companies that were headquartered here, Cleveland used to mean everything to them.
Yeah.
And the world grew and business grew. And so we have companies that are still headquartered here, but their priorities are truly global in nature. And us expanding our footprint and also expanding into areas that we hadn't been able to really greenfield on our own before. So Standing Partnership, the firm we acquired, has an incredibly strong business on lead generation, marketing automation, helping companies connect with customers in really unique and innovative ways. And we have a strong Marcom business within Dix Eaton, but much more about kind of brand and top of the funnel. This was much more bottom of the funnel. And to me, this is a chance for us to grow things that we're already doing and build on a strength from this firm that is rooted in, they do a lot of work with really large tech companies, many of whom are headquartered out on the West Coast. There was a time that our client base was something like 65% in Northeast Ohio. I would say it's less than 40% in Northeast Ohio. And I think I don't say that as a good or bad thing. I think that's just endemic of a world that's changed, and the need for different kinds of work have become much more sort of geographically agnostic. This is the other biggest part of our business. We morphed into ESG, environmental, social governance, sustainability. I think we were very early to market on it. So this started around 2014, 15 for us. And we're one of the largest communications firms in the country focused on ESG now. And that work is completely diverse from a geography standpoint. Nobody cares where you're headquartered. They care that you can really help them solve issues in that space and that you've got technical expertise that's going to translate to the kinds of opportunities and issues that they've got. So we're like all businesses, you have to continue to evolve, change, be focused on getting better every day. To me, that always starts with our people, investing in our people, helping them grow. Professional development is really big for us. And also hiring the kind of people that we know can thrive in our enterprise, because it's not for everybody.
So now as one of the largest, 100% employee owned communication firms, in the country, I always have been drawn to a Charlie Munger quote about, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. I would love to understand, from in your reflection of employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, in implementation, in practice now with, a bunch of years with it in place, what have been the outcomes, and how have the incentives driven that behavior?
We're 10 years into it, and I would say we're still in not infancy, but early adolescent stage with it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is it takes some time for it to take root. It's a pretty complex financial tool to explain to people how it works. But the baseline to it is if you perform, you're going to get shares every year. They're going to get valued every year. And if you're performing, they're going to go up in valuation every year. And for that, as an employee, you don't do anything except show up. It's an extraordinary benefit. It's also it's a retirement benefit. So the idea of trying to explain that to someone who is in their 20s or 30s is a different conversation than someone who may be later stage in their career. But this idea that you're creating this pool of growing wealth for being an employee, to me, it's centrally tied to everyone. And we talk a lot about all of us being employee owners. It means you're invested every day in our success. And I think that's different day to day for different individuals. You don't make all of your decisions rooted in that, but it is a North Star for us as an enterprise, this idea that we are all working together towards one goal, because when we perform and our stock price goes up $4 at the end of a year, and then you layer on new shares and the value of your account doubles in 1 year, which happened 2 years ago, and then last year went up by about a third, those steps, and you start seeing, oh, wow, in a few years, this is really going to be something truly meaningful for me. So it's been, I think it was an awesome transaction for us. Before we did it, I went and talked to a number of companies that have been through it.
Yeah.
It will take some time. I think we've just entered into the period where our people not only really get it, but they rally around it. They talk about it a lot. We have a ESOP day every year. That's one of our biggest celebrations. And I think it means something to our team in terms of it's a through line to the organization that binds us all together.
You mentioned earlier a motivation of, working in the benefit of others' success, both within the company and without. I'm curious how you think about success more generally in the impact that you hope to have looking back in retrospect, personally and within the organization.
I would, my success, how I would define it is the success of our organization and our people. And it may either sound Pollyannish or trite, and it's not. My good days are defined by our people's happiness and satisfaction. And it takes the form of lots of different things. When you run an organization and you're in the CEO chair, you get a very different sense of what's going on with people. And I will tell you that, we're a large enough organization that we're pretty broad and diverse, but I know virtually everyone on some kind of one-to-one basis. And so helping somebody deal with the loss of a parent, which is something that just transpired over the weekend, and giving them the freedom to deal with that and pay attention to the things that are most important, to me, that's success. Watching somebody get promoted and grow from one level to a next level and just seeing the confidence that comes with that is a huge validation of success for me. Being able to reward someone for really go above and beyond exceptional contributions, when they've gotten a platform and they've just delivered on it, that sends me home in a really happy mood. And, when Scott asked me to take over as CEO in 2015, the success of our organization sat very heavily on my shoulders because I had been at the firm for a long period of time. And I realized I was the third CEO. And I had known Henry and I knew what the firm meant to him. And I knew what it meant to Scott. So, that kind of servant leadership, I've seen a lot of different successful leaders. It takes lots of different forms. And for me, it's about just constantly remaining focused on what can I do for our organizations that is going to help our people be successful. That's how I define that for us and for me.
How do you think about the future of the business itself and where you would like to take it? And what is exciting to you looking forward?
This acquisition, we're 9 to 10 months into integration at this point, has been amazing. And I think that the opportunities we're opening up across both client bases, we had very aligned cultures, and we also have real distinct differences in the way that we do certain things. And as an example, we do a lot of ESG reports, and these are oftentimes Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 ESG reports. They can be really detailed, and they take months to do. They can take 5-6 months to do these reports. A lot of the work that Standing does on the technology side, the turnaround is hours. It is, here's the next deliverable. What does it look like? How are we going? So there's even differences in sort of how you think about time. We basically doubled the size of the company in terms of revenue, greatly increased our capability for profitability over the long term, which has enormous impact then on the value of the ESOP. That makes me really excited because that is long-term wealth building for every person in the organization through us taking a pretty bold swing with this acquisition. I think the other thing that's exciting to me and daunting at the same time is the business is changing so quickly. And the impact of technology, AI, it would be faulty not to mention just its potential.
I was certainly going to ask about it.
From a content standpoint and a creative standpoint, how do you factor those things and still stay a step ahead? Because I think the ability to counsel people and organizations around smart communications and marketing, how to handle big opportunities and big challenges is going to remain there. And I don't think that's going away. But the way that you do that for sure is going to continue to really evolve and I think change very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was thinking about it in kind of preparation for our conversation, I was reminded of the, Bezos framework of, banking on the things that won't change in 20 years. And I feel pretty confident that the human nature part of this, that people are going to continue to make mistakes, that change is the only constant, those are things you can count on. But it does feel like the implications of technology in your space specifically are really interesting, and how you try and stay ahead of it, because we're just not wired to, I think, cope and change at this rate that AI and the kind of exponential nature of technology at the moment and where we are on the whole inflection curve of it, and the kinds of mistakes maybe that even are being made. Like, how do you deal with the deep fakes and, just like the whole set of new kinds of problems that have implications from a communications, public relations, crisis management standpoint?
I wish I had an awesome answer to this, Jeffrey. It's a little bit at a time, but we've already seen. So to me, I'm a big believer in the power of AI and how it can be applied in our business. I do not see it as a threat. I see it as an accelerator and a way to do things better. I also think I do that with the proviso or caveat that you're going to have to be very careful about how you do some of those things. And I'll give it a specific example. We do a lot of work in investor relations. So helping companies with either quarterly earnings or how they're translating their results to end user markets, which are oftentimes investors, analysts, et cetera, or the street. So regulatory bodies. And if you decided to take something and say, hey, AI, give me a script for this, or tell me how you would tell this story, I could guarantee you that it would be about 80% there, and you would have potentially several things in there that could get you in immediate legal trouble.
Right.
The ESG realm is highly technical when you're talking about materiality or sustainability testing, or there's so much data involved there that has to be translated. If you're going to ask a tool to do that, it's not going to be the veracity of that right now. I would not trust. Now, where that is 2 to 3 years from now, I think those are the interesting questions to me. And again, I've encouraged our people. I'm like, if you're going to look at AI and say, oh my gosh, this is, ultimately, this is going to take over everything, or jobs are going to be replaced. I don't see that world at all. I think the role we play in terms of intelligent translation, counseling, strategy would be very, very hard to replicate or duplicate. But being better informed or getting you to a solution quicker, to me, that's a really attractive scenario. We have clients that are all over the map about this right now, by the way. So we have clients that are early adopters, and we have clients that this is strictly forbidden at any level. What I don't think is realistic. And I know I see this with our associates. If you're coming up new to the organization, but you're just graduating from college and you've used AI again and again and again for a variety of different things, you're going to continue to try and leverage it. And the idea that you're going to tell somebody, no, you can't do that, I'd be much more in favor of saying, here's some guardrails. We want to let you experiment or try this, but you have to recognize we have a very high standard for what that final deliverable is going to be. I'm curious to see where we are in 2 years. I mean, more than anything else.
I certainly share that curiosity. I don't love asking just kind of for broad counsel and advice, because it kind of, I think, loses its impact without being tethered to something specific. But with that said, I do want to ask, in your experience, like what the lowest hanging fruit is, from a CEO's perspective with regards to communication. What do you wish more people understood about the work you're doing and things that they could be doing to better their situation?
So I've talked a lot about change in really complex landscapes. You got a million things taking place at once, and you're trying to figure out how to move an organization forward as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I think AI can play a meaningful role to help begin to establish what a straw man or a framework might be. That's not a final solution. That's just it's an architecture that can help you then begin to fill that out. And I don't see that as cheating any kind of system. I think that's you're going to have to do all the thought process, all the translation, all the filling in the blanks on that from a human standpoint. But if that can help you get to a framework quicker, that's a useful thing. We're also seeing it a lot in monitoring or tracking. So when something's taking place, for example, in the aviation industry, crash takes place, there is aftermath, there could be an NTSB investigation, and you want to find out what's happened in similar incidents like this. Can you give me a translation of the top 5 to 7 comparable things that have transpired in the last couple of years? I think AI can get you down that path quicker. It can help to give you a framework for consideration. So for me, it was interesting, your comment just now. I think we're going to have a next generation of people that are going to be much better schooled in what prompting really means to get to the best answer quicker and have a much better understanding of how the iterative process of AI can be accelerated to get you to a place where you're learning something in a shorter time frame that's really going to be meaningful for what you're trying to provide. I know there's schools all over the country that are actually now have programs that are just specifically on how to do prompts. And we're going to be hiring people in the next few years. I would think that that's going to be an important tool to have in the toolkit.
I had enjoyed kind of hearing about the origins of Dix Eaton, kind of grounded in this, role as a CEO whisperer, confidant, consigliere, which I think kind of, to me, echoes in this reality that you often will hear that being CEO is the loneliest job. Who does the CEO get to talk to? And so I'm curious, in that kind of meta framing of it, how do you think about that for yourself personally as the CEO of the CEO Whisperer organization? Who do you see counsel from? How do you, who do you turn to help navigate, the difficult situations that you encounter?
The truth is, if I think you're doing the CEO job really well, it is both lonely and hopefully you're also surrounded by people that are aligned to your perspective and the things that you care about and your values. So I have incredible compatriots with me in terms of teammates, colleagues that I've worked with for a long period of time who I rely on a lot. The CEO role, I think one of the things you have to accept is ultimately there is no other behind you. And there are going to be decisions made. Somebody has to craft a vision based on what you know. That's the CEO's job. You have to be comfortable doing that. And I've heard a lot of people that I've worked with over time say, I think I want to be the CEO. And I'm like, I'm not sure you really want to be the CEO. Because when you sit in that chair and you have to face, and there's a lot of good things, and there's a lot of really tough things. And very, very difficult conversations, making very hard decisions sometimes. Those are not for everybody. I think having people, I have other CEOs or just friends that are discussion partners for me when I want to talk something through or chop it up a little bit. But I think ultimately there also has to be a kind of a comfort level of I'm the last person standing in this, and I have belief in my beliefs. I think judgment matters a lot. And, one of the things that I have just learned over time is don't react, respond. I try to really digest information, and I can make a decision quickly, but I have learned I want a full consideration set before I jump to any kind of conclusion on things. And then understand all the different ripples and effects that come from big decisions, because not thinking those things through can lead you down paths that you don't want to go down. So it's a great job for somebody that wants to have kind of unique impact, but you are sort of operating without a net a lot of the time.
Yeah. How do you cultivate better judgment?
Listening, learning. I'm an extraordinarily curious person. I'd like to think I have a sense of what I think a solution can be. I am always interested in hearing from others about what they think it can be. And back to the trust equation, if your self-orientation is such, and again, I've seen a lot of different kinds of CEO leaders that are really successful. So this isn't judgmental. My style has always just been, I want to hear from people and I want to listen to things from a lot of different vantage points, not just a business standpoint, but what's the human implications of anything. And from a judgment standpoint, I think there's Henry trusted Scott in terms of judgment, and Scott learned to trust me in terms of judgment. And part of that was seeing with repetition decisions made that stayed true to the organization, whether somebody was watching or not, or whether it ultimately was good for the individual or not. And again, I think part of being a good CEO, there's going to be times that you're going to do things that aren't necessarily good for you, but it's the right thing for the organization. And you got to believe in that. You got to believe it all the way down to your core.
Wow. Yeah. Well said. Before our closing question, I always like to leave a little space for the unsaid, something you wish I had asked about that I didn't, something that you wanted to, call attention to that we didn't get to. Is there anything that comes to mind in reflection on your journey, on Dix Eaton, on the history, the path forward, what you're thinking about?
One thing that has been incredibly powerful and really satisfying for me from a very early age, there was a guy who you may know of, Jeffrey, Dick Pogue. His father was one of the founders of Jones, Day, Revis & Pogue, one of the largest law firms in the country. Dick is either 93 or 94 years old. He still serves on a bunch of boards.
Yeah.
He was one of Henry Eaton's best friends. And Dick worked at Dix Eaton for a number of years. And he was the first person to say, get involved in the community, get on boards, find ways to give back and be participatory in the environment around you. And, time is a challenge for everyone. But from an early age, he encouraged me to do that. And I got very involved in working with different kinds of organizations. And I think over time, I've ended up serving on more than 20 boards. And what it has taught me is just back to judgment and decision-making, seeing how other organizations have to translate really complex situations. I love learning the inside, the guts of organizations in terms of how they work, what they do, how they treat their people, how they do certain things. And, I always talk to our team about if you want to get involved in an outside organization, whether it's a board member, volunteer, whatever it might be, you're going to learn so much that's going to help you when you come back to this organization, because you're going to broaden your perspective. And I just feel it was a huge benefit to me to go learn and see lots of other different ways of doing things. And the relationships that I built through that, to me, kind of steward me through so many different things, because they're people that I've continued to be really close to in kind of all levels of life. So get involved, get out there. It doesn't have to be this many. Just pick something you're really passionate about and get involved in it.
Yeah. Well, with that That could be a great segue to talk about our closing question, which is grounded in Cleveland, but it's for hidden gems in the area, some things that other folks may not know about, but perhaps they should.
During COVID, my wife and I, who just retired after 35 years, a public school teacher, go teachers.
Go teachers, yeah.
We did, like many people did, we did a lot of hiking and walking. And I live in Lakewood. I love Lakewood. But we found all these amazing trails in the Lorain County Metro Park system. Huge. I'm a massive fan of Cleveland Metro Parks, spend a ton of time across that spectrum. But I found all of these hidden gems out in Lorain County, Sheffley Gardens and Black River Reservation that are just amazing. And they're half an hour away. The other thing that I would just say, I originally grew up in Texas. It would be hard to approximate how much I love Mexican food. I could eat it 5 days a week, no problem. And I've got a few hidden gems, but the place, if you really wanted to find me, there's a place on 117th called El Jalapeno that I've gotten to know the family well. It's always the best meal I have. It's the most relaxing atmosphere, and they take care of me. So those are big things. And then I guess lastly, I would just say get out and about in this community. There's so many different things to see. It's funny when people are like, yeah, I don't know what to do in Cleveland this weekend. I'm like, just ask. I'll give you a list of 25 different things that could go on your list. It's a remarkable place. I'm trying to recruit my daughter back here from Scottsdale. I love to see how much construction is taking place in terms of residential with people moving back downtown or to the near inner ring suburbs. I just think our community has so much to offer and so many unique attributes that love being here.
Yeah, certainly share that sentiment.
Yeah.
Well, Chaz, I
came from New York, right?
That's right. Yeah. Here on my own volition. Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time, for sharing your perspective. This was a lot of fun for me. Really a fascinating conversation.
Me too. And it's been great to meet you, Jeffrey. Just to appreciate what you're doing, storytelling across our community, central theme to what we just talked about, and learning so much from different people. You're a great questioner, great steward of the conversation, and it's really just interesting to see where people go. So I've enjoyed listening. So
I do appreciate that. If folks had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, outside of, trying to meet you at your local Mexican institution,
I would by all means make my email and phone number available to people. I love meeting new people. I'm a little careful with that just because time,
yes, totally.
Time is challenging. But anybody that had questions or wanted to talk something through, I'm always more than amenable to do that. I feel like something else that didn't come up today. I've always stayed open to people who just say, hey, I just want to meet or get some perspective on things. I get easily as much out of that as anybody probably gets from me. So I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Chaz. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Be well, man.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternjefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.